Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to, it's very nice to see this large and engaged crowd, I can tell already. Welcome to the Center for Global Development. I'm very pleased you could join us for this afternoon's event, Advancing Women's Leadership, How Can We Support Women Political Leaders in Africa and Beyond? At CGD, here at CGD, we've been doing various research projects on women, and particularly women and the economy, how to promote gender equality worldwide, how to evaluate programs that are bringing women financial services, what works to combat traditional practices that are harmful for women and girls like child marriage and female genital mutilation, and what might be the implications of more girls knowing that they live in a society where they can time childbirth. What might be the implications in the long run for women's empowerment and thus for development itself. Today's discussion is quite special. It's about gender equality in the political sphere. We know that women, when they're elected to village councils or to national parliaments, they have an influence. We know that from evidence that, in general, public investment in health and education rise when there are more women in those positions. So having women in political office, we think, is a good thing for development. And certainly when that happens, women serve as role models for girls, and that makes a difference in the long run. But it turns out that it's not so easy to be a woman in politics. And today we're going to hear from President Joyce Banda about her experience in politics and about her work in her goal. She's going to tell us about her personal experiences in politics and talk about her current work to help other women at all levels access positions of political leadership. So it's really a pleasure for me to extend this welcome to you, President Banda. Where are you? Yes. Former President of Malawi, to be more formally introduced in a few moments by my colleague Todd Moss, who's done a lot of the conspiring to get her here today. I'm also pleased to extend a welcome to you, President Banda, as my new colleague. President Banda will be joining CGD as well as the Wilson Center as a distinguished visiting fellow to focus on the issue of women's political leadership as well as other areas of gender equality. She brings, obviously, So welcome to Washington as well, in general. We really look forward to interacting with you and learning from you. This is a person who brings decades of experience, both in politics and in advocacy on behalf of women and girls. Today's discussion is part of a series of events put together by the Gender and Development Program here at CGD, and I just want to mention two more coming up this month. One is on June 9th, discussion of how the multilateral development banks track and integrate gender equality into their operations. Are they doing a good job or not? With quite an exciting list of people who've been doing that in the development banks themselves. And on June 23rd, for a discussion of gender and identification, I assume new biometric type identification. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. Before I leave the podium, I'm going to turn it over, or as I leave the podium, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Seeley, Executive Vice President of the Wilson Center. And I want to wish Andrew a very warm welcome as well. He's much loved here at the Center for Global Development, because the first words of his excellent book, What Should Think Tanks Do, are the Center for Global Development, et cetera, So get the book and read about it and read about the Center for Global Development. Andrew, where are you?
Well, thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Todd. Let me say that I'm a huge fan of the Center for Global Development. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Woodrow Wilson Center, but I started looking at think tanks a number of years ago, looking at think tank strategy. And the reason that the Center for Global Development starts off the book is really because they do such an extraordinary job in thinking strategically about how to have an impact. And it really is an impressive story. And for us at the Wilson Center, it's an enormous pleasure to be able to partner with the Center for Global Development to host Her Excellency Joyce Banda as a distinguished fellow at both of our institutions. So, Madam President, great honor to have you joining both of our institutions. The mission of the Wilson Center is to bring the worlds of policy and scholarship together. Hosting former President Banda is an opportunity to further this mission by providing a space for a very respected former head of state to share her expertise and reflections on women's leadership in the public sector, girls' education, and maternal health in Africa and across the globe today, as well as broader life lessons and leadership lessons from her tenure as president, as head of state. The Wilson Center has been at the forefront of these issues through our Women in Public Service project, our Africa program, and our maternal health initiative. And let me say that my colleague Monde Muyangwa, who runs the Africa program, is over here. Good to see you. Gwen Young, you'll hear from later, runs our Global Women's Leadership Initiative. And Roger Mark D'Souza runs our Global Sustainability and Resilience Initiative, where our maternal health work is housed. We look forward to working with CGD to provide support to President Banda during her fellowship with our institutions and to convening constructive dialogues around these critical forward-leaning issues that she's going to help lead. I will now turn the mic over to Todd Moss, Chief Operating Officer of the Center for Global Development, to introduce former President Banda. Todd.
Okay, welcome. I realize I'm now the third person standing between you and the speaker that you came here to see, so I'm going to be very, very brief. I think all of you know President Joyce Banda. We're going to ask her to speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then I'll have Gwen Young join me, and we'll have a conversation, interact with all of you. Very briefly, President Banda became the President of the Republic of Malawi in 2012. She served for about 2 years as Malawi's first female president and Africa's second. Before assuming office, she had a very long career in public service, serving as a member of parliament, as the Minister for Gender and Child Welfare, as foreign minister, and as vice president. Notable, while serving as the Minister of Gender and Child Welfare, she championed the enactment of the Prevention of Domestic Violence Bill in 2006, which provided Malawi's legal framework to support the prevention and elimination of violence against women and girls. President Banda has been extremely busy even outside her political life. She was instrumental in the formation of the African Federation of Women Entrepreneurs, which operates in 41 countries. She was involved with the Council for the Economic Empowerment of Women in Africa and the American and African Women's Business Alliance. She maintains a very vigorous travel and speaking schedule. And she's been involved with the Global Leaders Council for Reproductive Health and the Micronutrient Initiative. So you can hear she's been exceedingly busy, lots of issues that intersect both with the agendas of the Woodrow Wilson Center and the Center for Global Development. And we're super, super excited and honored to have her with us today. President Banda.
Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me, in a very special way, recognize Ms. Nancy Birdsall, the Vice President, Amanda Glassman. I'd like to recognize Todd Moss, who has been instrumental. I don't know where Riva is. And I would also like to recognize the Wilson Center. By the way, the person who brought me here lost his way or her way and took me to Wilson Center. So I've already been to the office. I want to, in a very special way, to thank Dr. Debbie Harding, who is a very, very good friend of mine, who has helped me on this journey. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be here I would like to start by asking, I was told to answer this question: how can we support women leaders in politics in Africa and beyond? But I also wanted to ask this audience, what is leadership? For me, my understanding is that leadership is a love affair. You fall in love with the people, and the people fall in love with you. 2, my understanding is that you serve at the pleasure of the people that gave you the mandate. And I've always asked myself, last year, 2 years ago, I spoke at the London School of Economics. They invited me there for a week. And the whole week we argued, are leaders made or are they born? And I insist, even now, that they're born. That if we don't bear that in mind, we might miss, because we begin to see them when they're very young. What we need to do is recognize that and nurture that. Scholars will insist that they are made. We can keep our views, but as far as I'm concerned, they are born. And we need to be on the lookout, because there are so many, even on the continent of Africa. Before I answer the how can we help women in politics, I decided that I should answer the why. So for me, why number 1, for women in Africa. It's not the first time we have becoming leaders. By the way, we have overtaken some very, very developed continents by producing 2 presidents already. Others are still trying, even now. So African women have always been leaders. There's Cleopatra of Egypt, there's Queen Nzinga of Angola, there's Princess Grace Matambo of Congo. We're not doing it for the first time. But what happened is that during colonization, somehow we went behind. We took a back seat until 50 years later, when our leaders on the continent, African leaders, started to agitate for change, for freedom, for safe rule. And women rose again to the occasion. And we fought gallantly with our men. And we are fighters. I have in mind women like Albertina Sisulu, Winnie Mandela, Graça Machel, Rose Chiwambo of Malawi, Joyce Munjuru of Zimbabwe. We have Rebecca Njeri of Kenya, and many, many others on the continent of Africa. Why number 3 is for us to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals this time. We need to have as many women as possible in positions of leadership, particularly in parliament, because that's where the laws are made. I didn't appreciate this before I went to parliament. I was in the civil society fighting and arguing and yelling everywhere. But the moment you get into parliament, then you can influence change within parliament. You can pass laws. I remember when we championed the domestic violence bill, we were only 27 women in parliament. But with the support of Oxfam and UNFPA, we were able to pass that law. I can talk until tomorrow and write a book about what we went through to have that bill passed. But finally we did. So women must be in parliament, and if we are going to achieve these Sustainable Development Goals all the way to 17, we must have women in decision making. Why number 4 is that half of the population of the people of this world are women. And the last time I checked, there are even more than half. But the last time I checked, they even also brought about the other half into this world. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it makes economic sense to invest in women. The McKinsey Global Institute reports that the advancement of women would add 12 trillion to global growth. The current situation is that 63 million of our girls are not going to school. There's so much gender violence in this world. And when we talk about those of us who have been in leadership and begin to cite the examples of what gender-based violence is, it's unbelievable. I was Minister of Gender myself. When a woman left her husband and went back home, and when the husband said, "You must come back," she didn't. He went hiding by the river and waited for her and chopped off both her arms. So we are not talking about gender-based violence that is petty. We are talking about serious gender-based violence. And for us to eliminate that, we must have women in leadership. But I also want you to take note that women's leadership is under attack. And I'll say this today and I'll say this forever. Because if we don't watch that, we will lose all the gains that we've made in 20 years since Beijing. And I want you to start from Australia. What happened to Julia Gillard? What names was she called? Go to Thailand, Philippines, Myanmar, Burma. Where have you seen a party run for an election, win, and the leader of that party, who was under house arrest for 20 years, doesn't take the position of president? Where does that happen? And then she has to sit aside and watch somebody else take the position of leadership, a man for that matter. You go to Zimbabwe, you go to Malawi, you go to Argentina, Brazil, Chile, United States of America. I was laughing the other day. Somebody said the problem with Hillary is that she's yelling. She raises her voice. She's shouting. And then that evening I watched Mr. Sanders. He is with his arms yelling. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, why number 6? For me, why must we support women in politics? Number 6 is that Africa is the continent of this century. Opportunities are there. And if we are left behind, we shall lose out as women. Secondly, the highest number of women in the parliament and in cabinet is in a country on the continent of Africa. So we have surpassed even in the Scandinavian countries that were doing so well before. 20 out of the six out of the 20 countries with the highest number of women in parliament, 6 of them are in Africa. So that is a reason for me, because we've already demonstrated that we can do it and that the political will is there. We just need to persuade the others that don't seem to see it, that whether they like it or not, we are here and we are here to stay. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I wanted now to answer the how. How can we assist women in politics? And let me take you on a journey with Joyce Banda very quickly. I am very grateful that all the issues that I've championed in my life originated from personal experience. When I was growing up, a friend of mine in the village was going to school just like I was. And I was going in town because my father worked in the police. And she was brighter than me. And she went to the village school, I went to the urban school. We went to the end of primary school, and then we were both selected to the best girls' secondary schools. She went one term. I came back the next term, she wasn't there to meet me. And my grandmother told me, she won't be meeting you. She dropped out of school because the family couldn't raise $6 for her to go back. As I'm talking to you now, Chris is where I left her. She got married at 15. The baby she had at 15 died last year. So Chris has lost out. It took me a long time to persuade her to turn her into a champion as well. So the free secondary school that I run in the village, Chris is the person who goes about identifying needy children to come to the free secondary school. If I didn't do it for Chris, I persuaded her that she and I can do it for other girls. I brought her to New York 2 years ago. And she was able to meet Bill Clinton. And that's the greatest achievement of her life. And I came face to face with the injustice in girls' education. Most of them are not going to school through no fault of their own. Is it fair? And secondly, it's maternal health. I was, in 1984, going to give birth to my 4th born child. And I suffered what they call postpartum hemorrhage. And that's the biggest cause of death in Malawi. And I was going to die. But I didn't die because my husband, who is a high court judge then, had a friend who was a gynecologist, got him to save my life. And I woke up. And I decided that I was not going to sit back and allow women to die giving life. Why is it that here in the West, when a woman is pregnant, it's a time of joy, expectation, you start to shop around, you even know the sex of the child. Where I come from, why must women be anxious? They don't know whether when they go, they'll come back. For me, that was injustice number 2. Number 3 was gender-based violence. I was in an abusive marriage for 10 years. And if I begin to talk about the fights, I'll go until tomorrow. By the way, I need to introduce Africa's first gentleman. So this is not the gentleman, it's somebody else. And I walked out, and I made up my mind that I shall spend my life assisting women that are abused to get out of that situation. Then I went into politics, and that is drama. There was even an assassination attempt on my life. Headlines in Malawi, Joyce Banda in a narrow escape, just because I switched cars. And now that I'm not in office, I've made up my mind. I've even formed an organization on the continent of Africa as an initiative under the Joyce Banda Foundation to assist women seeking elected office and to fight the unnecessary and unfair treatment of women in politics. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in my opinion, we all have to do something in order to support women to get into politics and to succeed and to get into office and to stay there. The international community must have the political will, particularly to achieve the SDGs in the time allocated this time, because it is unfair that the MDGs that we did not achieve were MDG 3 and 5 that have to do with women, women's gender equality, and maternal health. We let down the women of this world. This time, we need to start now. And the international community needs to work hard, to listen to what we are saying on the continent of Africa, mobilize the resources, and assist us. I say this because if you go through my life, statistics say that the people that have been touched by the work I've done are 1.3 million. And where I come from, there are so many Joyce Bandas. And I want you to imagine if there were 100 Joyce Bandas being supported. Because I didn't do it alone, I did it with you. And for me in Malawi, it started with USID. And I'm proud to see Carol Peasley here. Because it is Carol that I went to. And in those days, I didn't know one thing, and it was 1990. I was so green. I began to talk to her, and she put her pad down. And I knew that I wasn't making any impact. I was just yelling. I was just so passionate. Women are suffering. They need to go into small business. I need to assist them. I have been empowered myself because I had a new husband that I went shopping and found. But there are some locked up in abusive situations. They cannot economically empower themselves. And from the support that she gave me, from institutional development to money for microfinance, by 1997, we had reached 20,000 women in Malawi. And I received the Africa Prize. The Hunger Project is here. I see Mr. Conrad here. They are the ones who gave me the $50,000. We shared $100,000 with President Chisano of Mozambique. I took mine and started the Joyce Banda Foundation. Today, it has reached 1.3 million people. That is what I'm talking about. That we are not going to just talk here in America or in UK or in Europe. We are going to do it, and we are going to do it together. And we want partnership. Don't allow yourselves to come and think you can solve our problems, because we are not just sitting back waiting for handouts. We are ready to work. So forging smart partnerships is going to be the way forward. Later on in my career, when I started work as president of Malawi, I was fortunate that it was the European Union ambassador that alerted me about the corruption that was going on. It had been going on before I even came into office. And I made an announcement to the nation that I've been alerted. And I started to arrest people. I arrested 72 people. But a friend of mine from the World Bank, who was then president of the World Bank and then later worked with George Soros, her name is Obi. Now she's the one championing for the Chiboko girls in Nigeria. She told me, she said, you have started fighting corruption? How is it going? I said, I'm being threatened, death threats, and what? They're strong people. You don't tamper into that area. She said, then have a document that will exonerate you, that will show this world that you didn't do it. That when as you fight them, they'll fight you back. They'll even bring you down. But have a document. So I will forever be grateful to the British government that gave me the resources to conduct a forensic audit. So now there's a document that you can see. And therefore 72 people were arrested, and their houses and accounts frozen, property withdrawn. For me, if I am claiming that I love the people, then I'm not going to allow anybody to exploit them or to steal from them. But they promised me that we'll fight you back. And they did, and they fight up to now. But some of us must be brave and must do it. For me, the choice was, do I want votes and remain in State House, or is there life beyond State House and protect my people? So the people came first. I am grateful to those that assisted me in my work. I am saying this because I want the international community to know that we are not wasting time. When we partner, we get things done. On that score, I would therefore like also to ask the international community not to be the enabler. Don't allow us to come into your countries and buy huge houses. Ask us where the money is coming from. And start with me. Start with me. Ask us when we build these big houses, where we are getting the money from. We open these huge accounts with millions and millions of money. Because this is the money we shall need on the continent of Africa. To build the capacity to be able to pay the counterpart contribution that you require as you mobilize the resources I'm talking about to meet the SDGs in order for us to work together for the better good of the people of the continent of Africa. I want to say that ask African governments, what must they do? What must my colleagues do? One is political will. I didn't know, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, now I know that it is a powerful position. Just the pen in your hands, you can change everything for the good, but also you can destroy. So for me, African leaders must listen to me and listen very carefully. Times have changed. This is not a time when you are going to oppress anybody, because people are going to hold you accountable. These days, if you mistreat the people that elected you, they go and gather by the corner and another leader will emerge from there. Before you know it, you're out of office. Two, while I am saying that the international community should help us fight corruption, then my brothers and sisters on the continent must also fight corruption. I know, I say this because I know it's not easy. It's hard. And when I said this to one leader, he turned to me and said, and when you fought, where are you? You are no longer president. And it is true. But it must be done. But there's life beyond State House. Here I am, distinguished fellow. There's life beyond State House. But you have to do it right. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I have found that women, when they get into leadership, they make good leaders. They take risks. It's not votes that come first. It is the people. Women leaders appoint fellow women. Women leaders focus on issues of women and children. Women leaders stand up and they're not afraid. I know this because I know Ellen Sirleaf, and I know me, and I know Catherine Panza, who was transitional president. You look at her speaking, you say, yes, we are ready, we are not just. And when you appoint fellow women in Malawi for the first time, when I got in, the Chief Justice was a woman. The head of civil service was a woman. The Solicitor General was a woman. The 2 deputy governors of Reserve Bank were women. 100 appointments. Not even window dressing, qualified women. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is important for us to work with our men folk. Women have been talking to themselves for too long, and we have wasted so much time. I find that men are part of the solution, part of the trouble, and part of the solution as well. So I would like to appeal that our men folk and us join hands. I want to add weight to women leaders. It is going to be very critical if we are going to support our fellow women to get into positions of leadership. We must form networks for civic education, educate fellow women about what is possible. Why is it that women are the majority and yet they are not voting for one another? Maybe they need to be told, because you will be surprised that just a meeting with them yields a lot of positive results. We must also engage chiefs. African leaders must engage chiefs, traditional chiefs, because they are the custodians of tradition and culture. And I found that by engaging them and them telling their subjects to say that you can't have a woman deliver in this village, you all must go to a clinic. Everybody went to the clinic to an extent that they became so congested, I had to go and find the private sector to assist me to build 20 holding shelters in 20 months. And the private sector is willing to help. But the chiefs are critical. We were able to reduce death of 675 women dying per 100,000 to 460. Women will have to work and civic educate fellow women, involve men, and partner with donors. But we will need also to design training programs that are tailor-made for Africa. For many times, we have received the training from outside, and it is the wrong training, because it is not designed for us, for the people that we are talking to, the voters. One person came to train us and told us that you must be assertive, look the people in the eye, don't bore them, speak loud, and what. When you go to the village, in my village, that is the first thing you need to do to lose your election. Because if you go to speak to the chief, you need to kneel down. You need to reduce your voice, and you need to look down. So working in partnership with the international community to design tailor-made training for Africa. I want to fight harmful traditions that are standing in the way of girls' education, women's empowerment, etc. Harmful traditions that stand in the way of us bearing healthy children by restricted diets that are dictated to us by tradition. You can't eat eggs, you can't eat okra, things that you need. Now we are told the first 1,000 days of a person are critical. Women leaders, take charge. This is our time to stand up on the continent of Africa, organize ourselves to fight for our fellow women. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, allow me to end by speaking to the women themselves. It is not acceptable, as I said, that women should die giving life. And allow me to give you an example. I was appointed by the African Union to be Goodwill Ambassador for Safe Motherhood. And in that role, I went to a very remote village, 47 kilometers from any referral hospital. There was a clinic there. And I asked, how many babies were born last night? And they told me 1 baby. And everybody who knows me, I hug a lot. I hold babies everywhere. So I'm running over to this woman to hug her and to hold the baby. And she looks at me. And she says, I don't have a baby. And I said, why? She says, oh, we are supposed to bring a candle to the clinic. And I didn't have the 5 cents to buy a candle. And I walked 15 kilometers to get to this hospital. And so we started delivering this baby in the dark. And the cord was around the neck. So literally I knew immediately that they had strangled this baby. In a place where you can't even sue because you don't even know your rights. And I said, fine. And I went to an organization in Malawi called Zain. And I said, corporate responsibility, come with me. Install electricity in this clinic. And in less than a month, I was back to that hospital to switch on the lights. Why am I telling you this story? Smart partnerships. The private sector has a role to play as well on the continent. Finally, it is the women themselves. The women have to make up a decision that they want to stand for elected office. We have formed networks now, we have formed organizations, the private sector is here, the international community is here, women's groups are there, governments with political will, because governments too must look carefully at their budgets, because the budgets must be gender sensitive. But the women must decide they are going to get into leadership. What is happening now is that they're seeing how we are being treated, those of us that are in politics. And they're saying, what, is it worth it? Do I want to be disgraced? Do I want the women of this, in my family and everybody to hear that stuff about me? And they are not standing for election. In Malawi, we went from women 7 to 11 to 27 and to 45 with the help of the international community. Because for women, what they are lacking most is economic empowerment, to have money, to stand for elections, to compete with the men. Women are being abused. The media is supposed to be sensitized. But then if they don't have the money, they can't stand. We were able in Malawi to convince the Norwegian government, and they gave each member 100,000. But 100,000 to each woman took us from 11 women to 45. And so it can be done. But the problem is women are shying away. These last elections, the number went down. Why? Because people feel it's not worth it. So as we fight the abuses against women in politics, we must also encourage the women to stand up and say, but some of us have to stand for elections. I would like to call upon girls of this world, while we are mobilizing resources to send every girl child to school, fighting harmful traditions that stand in the way of their attending education, the girls themselves must want to go to school. And we must be the role models that encourage the women to go to school. In Malawi in the year 2000, I started an organization called Young Women Leaders Network, an organization to go to schools and mentor young girls. It was for the first time also when I published what I called Malawian Women Leaders Directory, a simple booklet that any young woman can carry in her bag and say, I want to get in touch with a woman doctor who I can speak to and find her easily with her contacts. Women themselves must realize that they hold so much power. I was at a nutrition conference this other day, and they were saying, why is it African women are eating last and least? And I said, well, I don't understand. Because they are powerful. And that civic education is going to come from us to make them realize that they are powerful. They grow the food, they process the food, they store the food, they cook the food, and then they don't eat it. Because the father is eating it and they go without food. They ate last and least. The women themselves and the men have done this a lot in Malawi, sensitizing the men to say, when your wife eats better, just like you benefit as a family because she's healthy, she will have healthy children. But the men are still sitting at the back of the house and the women are sitting at the other side. The women themselves have to take responsibility to change the socialization that is taking place at household level. Because it is there where we are telling our boys that they are more superior than their sisters. And mothers must take responsibility for that. I want to ask the women of this world to say that enough is enough. And that there's not going to be anything about us without us. And I want to ask the women of this world to insist that where decisions are being made, we must be sitting there. We have been on the agenda for too long. And if we are going to achieve SDG 5, we must start now and reclaim our position. And African women leaders, as I started out, I said there have been leaders before. So we are not saying anything new. We are just saying we want to go back to those days when we are respected as women leaders. And this is our time. If they don't do this, if we African women don't do this, then I'm afraid we are going to remain on the menu forever. Allow me to finish by telling you a simple story that my grandmother told me when I was 9 years old, and I said it at the Hunger Project 20 years ago. There was an animal kingdom in Africa, and there was severe famine that year. And animals were dying in their skulls because there was no food. And they were flocking together looking for whatever food they could find. And as they walked closer, the elephant with his long neck said, "I see somebody cooking food ahead of us." And everybody said, "No, but that's not possible. There's no food in the wilderness now." And they increased their pace, and they got to the place. And indeed, they found the little hare there with several animals. The other animals were busy collecting firewood, giving to the little hare to keep the fire burning, and whatever they were cooking was boiling furiously, and they are busy putting more and more firewood. And King Elephant said to the hare, "So while all of us are starving, you will have food. You are busy hiding here eating food." And the hare said, "No, Your Majesty, I'm not cooking food. I'm boiling stones." "You are boiling stones?" "Yes, I am. I'm boiling stones because I believe that if I keep boiling these stones, one day they will turn into pumpkins." And as all the animals laughed at the little hare and walked away, disgusted, he stood there and shouted behind the Majesty and said, "Your Majesty, at least I'm doing something about the situation." Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all that stand with us and by us in this struggle to change the lives of our fellow women on the continent of Africa. And thank you for passing on the firewood. But at least I'm doing something about the situation. Thank you.
You want to take the center seat? Here, we'll take this with you. You can sit it. Okay. Why don't you sit? Yeah. You're on the end. Okay, so that was a passionate tour de force of a remarkable life of women's empowerment, of health in Africa, of the fight against corruption. It's daunting to have to come up with good questions after that, since you took away most of the things I was going to ask you. I'm extremely, extremely pleased to have our colleague from the Woodrow Wilson Center, Gwen Young, join us. Gwen is, I think...
Thank you.
Gwen is the perfect segue for us from President Banda's passion and her experience in Africa to the wonky world of Washington, D.C. Gwen is the director of the Global Women's Leadership Initiative and Women in Public Service Project at the Woodrow Wilson Center. She was previously at the Gates Foundation, at IRC, at Harvard, and at Doctors Without Borders. So Gwen, if I may, I'll start with you. So I think that President Banda made a very passionate case for why getting women into leadership positions is important. I don't think we want to boil stones. We want to try to find things that are going to be very effective. Mm-hmm. So what do you think, from your position at the Wilson Center, what are the things that are going to help us get there?
Absolutely, no, that's a great question. I'd like to pick up on a couple of threads of what President Banda said. I think the first thing that is incredibly important is this partnerships piece. So the role of the international community, as you mentioned, the role of the private sector. Because the first way we're going to get there is through institutional change, right? So that's going to be governments, that's going to be legislation, that's going to be party politics, right? Whether that's demanding a ballot that has equal men and women on it, reaching outside your typical networks to find the right women. So I think the first piece is taking on the institutional change and making that commitment. The second piece I'd like to pick up on a bit is the mindsets piece. So both of women and of men. The notion of what is a good leader? Can I do this? Should a woman do this? I was leading a panel this morning where they were appointing a woman appellate court justice in Morocco, and one of the ministers, the male minister, said, "There's absolutely no way she can do this, in my opinion. She's a woman, she has children to take care of." The second man stood up and said, "Well, I'm a part of this appointment process, and I think we should let her answer that question." So I think just that sort of mindset piece, which goes to another point you were talking about, the evidence base of why women matter in politics. Let's remember that politics is about the distribution of resources and services, right? So there's the women should be there because we're 50% of the population, because we're actually 60% of undergraduate and graduate education across the world, because we're users of the services, and because women bring different solutions and different ideas. And the second way I think we're going to get there is really, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is building up the network of women and men that are working together. Because it's through your networks that you get jobs, it's through your networks that you learn about opportunities and you get to positions, and it's through your networks that you see what is possible. And if you can see women in politics, and you could see yourself there and be exposed, then I think that's incredibly important. So I think it's institutions, I think it's incredibly smart partnerships. I think it's working together to change mindsets, and it's working together with women and for women in order to, whether it's the education or the interest or creating the space, the safe space for women to run for office.
Great, thank you. So you mentioned networks. President Banda, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the efforts that you've made through a group called Elect Her into Office, some of those efforts to try to network young female political leaders.
Yeah, Elect Her in Office is a new initiative within the Joyce Banda Foundation. The Joyce Banda Foundation believes that when you go into an area with microfinance and leave, you don't make the kind of impact that you want to. For us, it is to take a holistic approach. A holistic approach in the sense that when you go into the community, when you leave that community 5 years later, women have income. Because for me, income into the household, particularly the poor household, is key. Because when there's income going into that household, then the girls of that household are going to school. And if they go to school, they are not getting married at 15, because my research has shown that those that are dying giving birth are between 15 and 19. So for this girl to stay in school 4 more years, it's not only about her future, but her life and health as well. And the fourth pillar for the Joyce Banda Foundation is leadership. Because when women get into leadership, they focus more on issues that affect women and children, and appoint fellow women, and all the issues I talked about. And the fifth cross-cutting pillar is that of human rights. So under the leadership pillar, we decided that we're going to take it upon ourselves to assist fellow women to stand for office and go to parliament. And it's a new initiative, so all we have done is to mobilize ourselves. We launched in Ghana last October, and just 2 weeks ago, we met again in Dubai to get to the next level, where now we have got a concept that, and then 2-3 days ago, we met NDI, because they too are concerned. They have launched on the 17th of March in New York at the CSW an initiative that also aims at fighting the abuses to women in politics. So we've just started.
So Gwen, both President Banda and Nancy Birdsall mentioned that women rule differently as political leaders. They make different types of choices. And I'm wondering if you've thought about, or if you have views on whether it's helpful for women candidates to emphasize some unique strengths of women, or does that risk actually some kind of backlash in the other direction? How do you think about highlighting those potential differences, and what are the pitfalls of that?
I think that highlighting those potential differences, I think, is incredibly important. I think attributing those to being a particularly woman or a woman-only quality is something that I think will cause some backlash. So, leadership has changed. Today, leadership, there's a word called transformational leadership. Leadership is now your indirect influence. We look at Mary Barra at GM and repairing the faulty ignition, or President Johnson Sirleaf and Ebola. It's your ability to mobilize indirect influence over people that's incredibly important. So I think emphasizing the qualities that are important today and the qualities that are important to bring to politics. And I think across the world, there's a big backlash against politics generally, which impacts people's interest and perceptions. But I think emphasizing those leadership qualities and emphasizing why you can do them, I think is incredibly important. I think the backlash comes for a couple of reasons if you claim these are female-only qualities. And I think that's where you risk having the backlash, and you risk minimizing your expertise and your skill set by making it a gender quality as opposed to an expertise and a knowledge.
I also believe that I have found that in State House, in leadership as president, I got more support from men than I did from women. And this is because of, I think, the approach, making them comfortable with you. Somebody was asking me the other day, how were you commander-in-chief? I said, yes, I even inspected those guards of honors. I went to the army anytime. I don't remember any time in my time in office when any man showed me that they undermined me. But I think it is the approach that you take in making them understand that it's both for both men and women, and that you are not in office to advance women's issues only.
Okay, so before we turn to the audience, I do want to take the opportunity to ask you, President Banda, about a question. I'm going to try and put this diplomatically. But when a leader comes into office, the international community, and you're seen as a reformer, the international community crowds in. They send advisors, they give you lots of support, lots of rhetorical support, lots of financial support. You get embedded in a network of people trying to help you succeed against political forces. Sometimes that can be impressive, not always, but sometimes. And then I'm certainly chastened by watching experience of a lot of anti-corruption fighters who have a lot of international support, but once they've lost politically or they're out of office, that international support dissipates. And in some cases, certainly some of Africa's bravest anti-corruption fighters have been abandoned by the international community. I don't think it's too strong to say that. And I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit on what your experience has been with the international community supporting you when you're in office versus what you've seen in the last 2 years.
I think what I would like to do is, that's a very important point that I forgot, under international community, is that when it's not easy to fight corruption, and it's very few leaders that will stick their neck out. I am just very proud as an African that there's now a crop of African leaders that are coming up fighting corruption on the continent. What the international community needs to do is to support them, is to encourage them, is to motivate them. Because if they are treated like victims rather than victors, then it discourages other leaders. Then they will turn around and say, what did you benefit? So for me, I think, one, while you're in office, while you're fighting corruption, do for me what the British government did. When I went back to them and said, I want to have a very clear picture of what's going on. I want to get to the people that were stealing, and I want to arrest them. But I need a forensic audit. They even appointed the Baker Tilly audit firm that came to Malawi to conduct the forensic audit. They provided all the financial resources. So we have a document now, it's even online. You can see who stole what, and they are still being tried as I speak. But then it is when that cloud comes that you then struggle to clear it. Because now you feel like a victim. So I feel sorry for those that don't have an advisor like I had in Obi to advise me to have a forensic audit, because I would have been in jail by now. Because in Africa, they don't care about any evidence or what. They can smear anything onto you and lock you up. And by the time they tell you you are innocent, it's 2 years. You've been in jail. But once you have that document, then it protects you. So for me, is to insist, even while in office and beyond, is to make sure that the international community stands by you and encourages you. Let other leaders see the benefit of standing up against this wicked practice. Because if they don't, then there's no point. And then you are a loner. And then, yeah.
Okay. Why don't we, I'll ask if you could please just raise your hand and identify yourself, and please try to ask a question or keep it short so we can get to as many as possible. Let's start right here in front, and then we'll go, we'll take a few. We'll start here, and then we can go right behind you. You're next, and then we'll go here too.
Thank you. I'm John Coonrod, the Hunger Project. I very much thank Your Excellency for acknowledging the Hunger Project's partnership with you. It's such an honor to be in partnership with you. I was really struck by your comment about leaders being born and really encouraging girls to make it through those critically early adolescent years and developing their leadership. And I'm just wondering what you see are possible ways to provide those leadership opportunities for girls. What could be done to support, nurture girls, as you said?
Mm-hmm. Good question. Yeah. Behind you.
President Joyce Banda.
Oh, is it on?
Testing. Oh.
There you go.
President Joyce Banda, thank you for your remarks. It's a pleasure to be here. As a young Malawian woman myself, I have seen firsthand some of the injustices that have taken place in Malawi, and in particular women and children's issues. My name is Marcia Trindad. I'm currently you recognize my name?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I'm currently a Global Health Core Fellow, and I work over at the UNAIDS US Liaison Office here in DC. So I guess my question would be, what advice would you give to young emerging leaders like myself and others on the continent who want to make lasting change? What advice would you have for African women who want to be empowered so that we in turn can empower others?
Okay, next we'll go here.
Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't taking that away. I thought you had another microphone. Can we get the microphone here? Next, gentleman in the front. Yes.
Hi, President Banda. I'd also like to thank you for being here today, and it's been a pleasure listening to all of you speak, so thank you for that. My name is Lindsay Alamang. My question for you, I likewise was really interested in what you had to say pertaining to specifically girls' part in the issue of women's rights, women's leadership in the African continent. I really appreciated how much you emphasized the importance of maintaining agency for the people in Africa and not taking that away in any sort of partnerships we forge. But I'm curious what specific ideas or suggestions or things you've seen on the ground that work for helping change the mindsets of parents and how they influence their daughters to be raised believing that they have the potential to be leaders, so that they don't grow up discounting this fact from the get-go because of the home they grow up in. That's something I'm very interested in learning more about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's take one more question, and then we'll turn back to the panel, and then we'll try and do one more round. I did promise President Banda we'll end firmly at 5:30, so yes.
President Banda, thank you for your commitment, leadership, and passion. I am Roger Mark D'Souza from the Woodrow Wilson Center, and I direct our maternal health initiative. And I wondered if I could ask you to reflect for a moment, and if you could tell us, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you started your presidency, and how that might have made a difference? Thank you.
That's a good question.
That is a good question.
All right, Would you like to respond to some of those questions? And then I'm not ignoring this half of the room. I will come over here. So, yes.
What do I know now? What I know now that I didn't know before, didn't happen while I was in office. I was president for 2 years, and the longest I slept was 6 hours. I was running around every day to notice anything that stood in my way. But what I've seen is after office, how everybody runs away. And then how you make new friends that emerge from nowhere and stand by you. I have a very good friend here, Gloria Hendon. She was in Malawi with me even throughout the election period. She has asked me repeatedly, where are your friends? So what I didn't know then that I know now is that even those in the international community, as Todd said, when you've left office, they can't meet you. They can't meet you. They don't open the doors. So it's that difficult, because then what I want to insist is that those of us on the African continent, state house or no state house, women leaders have a role to play. We must take responsibility to keep working. And for that to happen, if I think that if I go and meet Mr. Colnod or Dr. Harding, I'm going to make this difference in Africa, they must continue to open the door whether I'm in state house or not. That is what I didn't know before, that the doors are opened because you are in state house. That later on the woman leader in you is forgotten, is ignored. And yet, I have found this even when women are standing for office. Women go into the rural areas to compete to go to parliament. And everybody in that community knows that this person, if she's elected, she's going to bring about change for ordinary people. That person will not win because the community will support somebody else because she hasn't got a name or she hasn't got money. So equally, when you've left office, you don't have that name, but you're still a leader. I mean, can anybody look at me and say I'm not a leader now? Because I'm not in state house. There's so much work to be done there. And I have been in the civil society longer than I've been in public office. And 10 years in public office, for me, was just a detour. But I have reached 1.3 million Malawians outside the state house. So it is very important for all of us here to recognize African women leaders that are not presidents as well, that can bring about a lot of change. And that goes to answer the first question. The first question said, what is it that we can do for education for the girl child? For me, education, secondary education in Africa is not free. This government, the United States government, I will forever be grateful to this government because I think it was when Ms. Carol Pistol, who is here, was director in Malawi, where they implemented a project they called Gable Project, where girls went to secondary school free, so sponsored to go to secondary school. Most of the women leaders in high positions now in Malawi are those that benefited from that project. Now, those of us who are women leaders right now, I have 19 students in the medical school of Malawi. They were going to drop out on Monday last week because I didn't have the $3,000 available for them to be able to write exams. $3,000 for 19 students. Now, a gentleman from Texas paid the $3,000 and he promised to pay to 2 more semesters. And we shall have 19 doctors in Malawi. So it is those partnerships that we forge that matter most than anything else. And for me, tertiary education is just as important as secondary education. Because sometimes when the girls drop out from the College of Medicine, they've only got 1 year to go. And after 1 year, you have a whole doctor. A girl child can drop in standard 4 because you don't even know whether that girl is going to end up. But it is really tragic. It really breaks my heart when I see a student in university dropping out because she can't pay for the last 6 months. And that's where we need partnerships to make sure we push as many women as possible. Those are the leaders. The leader is not in standard 2, where you come into Africa and say, I have a project. What are you doing? Buying school uniforms. Really? But when you come and say, we want to help girls to get educated, then help me to get that girl to become a doctor. Because at the end of the day, that is the leader we are looking for.
Okay.
I think the other one was for my daughter from Malawi. I think my answer is be the change that you want to see, because there's so much that work in Africa and in Malawi, and at your age you can also achieve so much. But we must be available to you, and I want to promise you that I'm available from today. You can get in touch with me anytime, because that is the age where you must start, and know that the moment you do well, reach out and touch somebody else.
Okay. All right, let's just take 2 questions from this side. All right, we've got one here and then one all the way over there. It's just here in the white, please. Thank you.
Hello, President Banda. I'm very much struck by your remarks. My name is Brenda Wilson, and I work with African journalists and formerly was a journalist myself. One of the things I've been struck by over the years in working in Africa is, and it's something that it's also an issue for many of us in this country, and that is the question of to what degree Africa, many countries, are dependent upon donors, whether it's to fight HIV/AIDS, and I'm looking at the politics in the United States here, the budgetary and economic issues around the world regarding refugees. Everybody is tightening up and closing down. What do you foresee? How, I mean, in looking ahead to deal with many of the things that you have talked about, whether it's education or health, is there an expectation that the West and other countries will continue to support this kind of development? And what's the alternative? We're facing these issues in the US, looking for support even here domestically and finding people closing doors. And I'm wondering what you're seeing, you know, for Africa and for Malawi.
Great. Final question.
Hello, my name's Charles Kenny. I'm here at the Centre and honoured to welcome you as a colleague. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your domestic violence legislation. One of the things we've been looking at here is sort of the impact of laws on outcomes in gender, and seeing, you know, passing a law on the age of marriage seems to have not so much of effect many places, but sometimes actually passing laws against female genital cutting, for example, really does seem to reduce the impact. So can you talk a bit about what you tried to do to turn the law into reality, if you will, around domestic violence, to make sure that it actually led to reductions in domestic violence, you know, in the household?
Yeah, thank you. Let me start with that one. Yeah, the whole issue of violence for us in Africa, what I've seen is related to violence often. And so for me, it is the empowerment of women that begins to solve that problem, economic empowerment. When the woman begins to contribute towards the income at household level, she begins to gain respect at household level. A survey that was supported by USAID, an impact study that we conducted in 1999, showed that 73% of the women we had worked with had gotten out of poverty. But 84% of the women had earned respect at household level, because that is very critical, because that reduces the instances of violence against women. I established, when I was president, a center that I called the One-Stop Destination for Abused Women. And the day I launched that, I found a woman there standing with a man and an 18-month-old baby on her laps. And I thought that they had been fighting and they came to report. And the man said, no, I'm not even her husband, I'm a neighbor. I heard this child crying every day for a year. And one day I broke the door and found that her husband was defiling that child, was sleeping with that child. When I asked, so if this child was 18 months when I saw it, the child was 8 months when he started. A witch doctor had told him that's the only way he would cleanse himself of the HIV virus. And so the man had gone to report, at the police when I asked this woman, how could you have sat around for a year and watch him do this to your child? By then he was arrested. She said, I don't have an income. I don't have parents. I don't have anywhere to go. So she herself was in her teens, so she was a child herself. I adopted her. I gave her a home. A month later, there was a call from the gate of the State House. The baby had died. So obviously, it had been infected by the father. So that is the kind of, that's what I'm talking about. That if she assured me, and I believed her, that if she had any means, she could not have sat around and watched that, she could have run with her child. So economic empowerment is key for me to fight against gender-based violence. It is the violence against women in politics that we really are grappling with. We don't know what to do. And when I met NDI this past week, it looks like they too have discovered we don't have proper data that quantifies how much is going on, what is going on. So they too are trying to see what they can do to make sure that they work with the UN women to gather this information so that we can know exactly what's going on. But we see here instances where, like Uganda, when they were campaigning, men and women were, I think, arrested. The woman was stripped naked. So women are being abused and treated in such a way that if any other women hear that that woman standing for election was stripped today, they will not join politics.
Okay.
So the next question was, what can we do? We seem to be dependent on aid, and that's true. My position was that when I was in State House, in 2001, long before I became president, a lawyer in Malawi who was then the director of public prosecution made an announcement that Malawi is losing 30% of its resources through wastage and corruption and theft and things like that. In 2006, he elected the then president, and he was sacked. In 2010, somebody repeated that. So my position when I became president is, well, this is not a poor country. The former president, the late president in Malawi, told us as Malawians that Malawi is not poor, it is Malawians that are poor. We have huge deposits of anything you can think of, unexploited. So if indeed 40% of our budget comes from donors, then we just need to exploit our resources, and we just need to stop this theft. Then we shouldn't need any aid. My thinking, my feeling is that Africa is a rich continent, and that if we put our act right, we don't need donors. But we need to start now to do something about the situation. And in some countries, it's already happening. You can see in some countries that the progress they're making, they can do without donors very soon. And those, especially those that are fighting corruption, please encourage them and motivate them to do more. The other question was,
I think you got
that was it,
yeah.
That was a good note, Tenda.
So I think we're at the end of our program. I'm extremely pleased that we're at the beginning of your fellowship, and you're already a Washingtonian because your post-political life, you're now attached to 2 think tanks, which is the classic Washington thing to do. I know that I want to thank Gwen for joining us. I know that Gwen, Monde, Roger Marks, Andrew, looking forward to their new colleague, as are Nancy, Amanda, Charles, Myra, Megan, and of course me. Excited to have you here with us and to continue to learn from your experience and to work on your incredibly rich agenda. So if you could join me in thanking President Banda.